Ба, бі, бе, бо, бу, би. Ба, бо, бу, би. Ба.
The man's speech began with monosyllabic exclamations similar to the sound of ba, boo, or do, Dutch anthropologists claimed not long ago. Probably this meant some kind of approval or a call to action. Scientists made these conclusions after a series of experiments. They reconstructed the speech apparatus of the first representatives of the genus Homo using plastic tubes, and in order to understand what their speech might have sounded like, they let the air pass through this construction and analyzed the sounds received. Despite convincing results, many scientists consider we can't accept them as irrefutable evidence. After all, today we still don't have enough information to recreate the appearance and way of life of our ancestors with 100% accuracy.
Well, the degree of ambiguity is too high. We can make various assumptions about what happened in the beginning, in what order, at what speed. But it is impossible to register this, because this has already happened. And it must be understood that the discussion of the origin of language and communication is inherently hypothetical. And for this reason, sometimes such discussions are generally perceived negatively.
This attitude to this topic developed in the middle of the 19th century because of the huge number of questionable and sometimes fantastic hypotheses about the origin of human speech, since it wasn't possible to check any of them. In 1866, the Parisian Linguistic Society declared the problem of the origin of speech and language insoluble.
To understand what happened there 3 million years ago, having petrified fragments of bones, well, they are not even bones, strictly speaking, but stones, well, is problematic. Therefore, for a long time, there was actually a ban on work with regard to the origin of speech. Then it was thought that this was simply indecent to research this.
But since then, science and anthropology in particular have created new opportunities and methods that allow us to make assumptions and put forward hypotheses. So it has become obvious that before the man was able to speak briskly, millions of years had passed. It has also been possible to find out at which stage of evolution our ancestors began to make attempts to speak. Scientists believe that the first one to speak was probably Homo habilis, or the man of skill, who lived about 2 million years ago.
That is, they still didn't exactly speak like we do, but at least they moved like this. Moreover, it is indicative that when the modern man makes a stone tool, and if you look at what is going on with his brain, you can see that his brain area is responsible for hand movements and for speaking. That is, when the man makes a tool, he pronounces it.
The fact that it was the skillful man who strove to master colloquial speech is also supported by other facts. On the occipital bone at the base of the skull, we have an opening for the hypoglossal nerve. The more complex the movements are, the thicker the nerve is, and correspondingly, the larger the hole is. In the most ancient people, it is rather small, but starting from Homo habilis, it starts to increase dramatically. There are other morphological features of the skull indicating the ability to speak.
There are two areas in the brain that are responsible for speech. The Broca area is somewhere around here in this place. It is responsible for speech mechanics mostly. And the Wernicke area, a little further back to the temporal part. It is responsible for understanding speech, that is, what is said. Well, everything is actually subtler there. There are lots of nuances, but it's something like this. Accordingly, in Australopithecus, everything is quite smooth there, exactly like in monkeys. And starting from some of the first, such as Homo habilis, and certainly with Homo erectus, they have noticeable protuberances appearing in this place, which means that if this side is more developed, well, probably some function is more developed there.
We will hardly be able to learn more about how the speech was born studying the skulls of ancient people. One thing is clear, without a developed brain, we would not have been able to communicate in such a complex manner, and vice versa. If we hadn't talked, the brain wouldn't have the stimulus to develop. But what made the brain evolve so that speech became possible at all?
Our ancestors experienced a real evolutionary shock. This happened when they were pushed out of the forest and into the savanna. The fact is that apes live in the forest very comfortably. They have practically no serious enemies. But when they go to the savanna, there are a huge number of predators, hoofed animals which these predators hunt. And man finds himself almost between life and death. Because, firstly, there is not so much food in the savanna.
The problems of survival, which our ancestors encountered 2 to 2.5 million years ago, served as a powerful impetus to the development of intelligence. This is confirmed by archaeological findings. It was then that the brain of our ancestors began to increase markedly in volume, and it continued until the appearance of the first sapiens about 100,000 years ago.
That is, in order to speak, it is necessary to develop the nervous system, which is very complex. Large special areas of the brain are necessary, which will be responsible for this, which will regulate all this. Because, for example, to control breathing is very subtle. We don't just need to breathe in and out, but very quickly breathe in and out. Well, very quickly and subtly move the larynx. And all this must be done by the brain in the first place.
The need for complex communication grew, but the physiology of the first Homo still didn't allow them to express their thoughts with articulate words because the evolution of the speech apparatus followed the evolution of the brain. For this reason, speech originated from monosyllabic sounds. And the first languages of our ancestors were sign languages and probably whistle languages.
A whistle generally can be heard at 8.5 miles away, as shown by experiments with the inhabitants of the island of La Gomera. There is still. The fact is that whistle languages are spread all over the world. And in particular, there is a whistle language, for example, of the most archaic tribe on the earth, the Piraha, whose language is absolutely primitive, and phonemic systems are even very primitive there. And the grammar is very primitive. Well, they have a whistle language too.
To learn to speak, we needed a major anatomical transformation. The man had to give up a lot. For example, massive jaws. After all, it is impossible to articulate with them clearly and quickly. For this reason, the clever Neanderthals spoke much worse than our immediate ancestors, Cro-Magnon people.
They had a huge jaw, huge teeth. All this moved there much more slowly than we have it now. Therefore, probably, they spoke not so easily and freely. But judging, for example, by the structure of the hyoid bone of the lower jaw, they could not say A. That is, probably they had some exotic languages there. They had a huge nose. Probably everything sounded like French there.
For millions of years, the desire to communicate and transmit information to each other has been sharpening and changing our brain, our appearance, and way of life. The man created the language bit by bit, and in many ways the language has been creating us. The phenomenon of Mowgli children proves it.
That is, if a person like Mowgli is planted to a wolf pack, he isn't going to speak any language. And then if, when he's over 5 years old, it will be impossible to teach him any language. He'll remain practically deaf and mute. He will only growl and howl like wolves. At some point, when he is 3, 4, 5 years old, he loses this ability. What exactly happens, we, in principle, still don't know. There is no change at the anatomical level, but still, after this age, a person can learn the language only as a foreign language, as we teach him at school through heavy exercises and so on. And still, he won't be able to master it as much as his own language. It'll be like a foreign language for him anyway.
Sonyushka, tell me, who is this?
A bear.
A bear. Well done.
Despite its ancient origin, speech is not innate for a person, and certainly not absorbed with the mother's milk. And yet, thanks to the study of Mowgli children, it became obvious that you only can learn to speak as a child.
Once upon a time, there were...
Grandfather.
And... The old woman. And the old woman? Now Ulyasha will continue to tell. They baked gingerbread boy. Here we have the gingerbread boy. The gingerbread boy went after that and he won. Well done, Ulyasha.
Looking at how children speak, it seems that they learn the language easily and very quickly. However, experts say, in reality, this is a rather complex and lengthy process. Normally, it takes about 8 years.
Yes, indeed. Child ontogeny, it repeats the historical phylogeny in many respects, which humanity passed at the stage of its development infancy. And child speech develops very interestingly. It has very pronounced, bright stages that are not characteristic of adult speech. And in order to develop child speech, very many conditions are necessary prerequisites of both neurophysiological and social kind.
But why does the formation of speech and the study of language take us so much time and effort? The thing is that these processes go in close conjunction with the development of the child's thinking and intellect. One without the other is impossible.
The brain is extraordinarily plastic, and the development of a child from 0 to 2 or 3 years old is not just its development from an infant into a creature that knows how to do many things, but this is still a colossal development that occurs exactly in the brain. It is the brain itself that is the organ that gets its maximum development during the first year. This is also the ability to interact with other people, the so-called social intelligence.
To make sure that both the child's speech and his intellectual abilities develop normally is possible, offering him a rather simple task. It's called the fourth one is the odd one out.
I'll show you a picture, and you'll have to say what's wrong with this picture and why. Okay? Okay. In the beginning, I'll show the picture to Sonyushka. Sonyushka, are you ready? Ready? Okay. Look at this. I have 4 pictures. What is painted here? Bells. Bellflowers. Good girl. What else? Flowers? Flowers. Go on. Flowers again. Again flowers. What else? A kitty. And a kitty. Who is the odd one out here? Who's painted wrong by the artist? Who's the odd one out? I don't know. You don't know? Can I give you a clue? Kitty. Fedya offers a kitty. The kitty is the odd one out. Correct. Fedya, can you explain then why the kitty is the odd one out? Because there are flowers there, and the kitty is not a flower. Correct. Because the kitty is not the flower. Is it so? Yeah, it is so. Okay. Here it is, see? This is the staging of child speech at the age of 3. Yes, she cannot do it yet. Well, she cannot even determine, it is difficult, which is the odd one out, though she names everything. And at the age of 5, we can already do such an experiment.
Such systematic diagnosis of speech allows us to timely recognize not only the delay in its development, but also to reveal deviations in the mental health of the child.
Выдра из ведра выпрыгнула, воду из ведра выплеснула. Выпрыгнуть-то она выпрыгнула, выплеснуть-то она выплеснула. Вот впрыгнуть и вплеснуть обратно не смогла.
It's amazing how much information can be obtained by studying and analyzing speech. For example, one can make a portrait of a man on the basis of the phonogram of the voice alone, to understand whether he is overweight or thin, tall or small, whether he has large jaws. When exploring the written language, scientists can accurately determine which century or millennium the authors of the text lived in to comprehend their everyday life.
And what kind of culture, for example, do they have? That is, well, what words have been preserved in the descendant languages? So this was perhaps what they had there. They were farmers or hunters. They lived near the sea or in the desert. What kind of plants, animals, etc. they had there? This can be done several steps deep down there. Well, to reconstruct 10 to 15 millennia back.
Thanks to the study of ancient written sources and their comparative analysis, Scientists managed to reconstruct many archaic languages. For example, Akkadian, which was spoken by the inhabitants of ancient Mesopotamia, and even pre-Indo-European. It became the ancestor of almost all European languages. However, it is not yet possible to understand what it sounded like and what the very first human language was like. After all, it existed before the invention of writing. The only thing the linguists are sure of, it was not fundamentally different from any of the modern languages.
That is, they of course differ in terms of sounds. They differ in terms of the availability of words for rely. But the fundamental structure of language as it was, say, 5 millennia ago is the same. It is the same for both tribes, for the Papuans and for Americans and Britons. Therefore, we have no reason to assume that 10,000 years or 20,000 years ago, the language was fundamentally different.
In addition to the method of comparative analysis, linguists don't yet have another reliable method for reconstructing ancient languages. Even the study of the most archaic and closed tribes on the planet, unfortunately, doesn't help to understand what the language of their ancestors was.
The language, regardless of where it exists, among a large number of people or among a very small community, it is constantly changing. This property of the language is not subject to anything. It is impossible to change it. That is, people cannot influence this even with a great desire, with all the centralized power. The language will change, and change at about the same speed, regardless of how, again, in what place it is spoken.
A vivid proof of that languages are constantly changing is our vocabulary. Have you noticed how often the words irrevocably leave our everyday life or change the meaning? For example, the word щепетильный in Russian today it means pedantic, strict even to the small detail, but only 200 years ago it had a completely different meaning.
Let's remember Eugene Onegin and how Pushkin describes the study of his hero. He says, all fancy goods for whims abundant, which scrupulous London sells to us, and then they come to us by ship for bread and cured pork and lard. If we look at this quotation from Eugene Onegin, we might think about the fact that probably in the Pushkin times, the word scrupulous had some different meaning, won't we? Because in the Russian language, it is still preserved in some dialects. There is a word, щепет. Щепет in the meaning of haberdashery goods. Haberdashery, that is, some small fancy articles. And щепет. And where does this word come from? And it comes from the well-known word щепа, which means a wooden chip. Щепа, that is some small fragment that has been separated and has come off the wood block. Yes, this means that we see that since haberdashery goods are small, usually small, these trinkets, there are a lot of them, and it means that on the basis of this meaning, there developed the word щепет and the adjective щепетильный, meaning scrupulous.
A relatively short time has passed since Pushkin lived, but many of the words used by the poet and his contemporaries are outdated or have changed their meaning. It is not surprising that representatives of different generations sometimes find it so difficult to understand each other. Surely everyone has made mistakes interpreting the intentions of the interlocutor reading their text. Nonverbal communication has been developing and becoming more complicated along with the language always. And you cannot do without it. Let's try, for example, to teach a person to tie a tie over the phone. Let's carry out an experiment. Ivar, who knows several techniques of tying ties, will instruct Anton, who doesn't know how to do it at all. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, hi.
Well, are you ready?
Yes, quite ready. You can start. Okay, I'm switching on. Wait, I'll turn on the loudspeaker mode now.
Okay.
Well, okay, I'm ready.
Well, look, now the most difficult thing. Take the tie and put it on your neck.
The young people quickly figured out how to put the tie on the neck and get it ready for tying the knot. However, it was easy to notice how carefully Ivar was choosing words to describe some successive actions, worrying that Anton would not understand him.
Well, okay, the next stage. We've done it. It's like this. Aha, now, just a second. Somehow I'm a little confused. So then you take the wide end at the bottom, and you should wrap it around this knot.
What do you mean?
Well, you put it through and got its end out. So you take it and wrap it around your tie. That is, you should... Well, in fact, you have this knot, and you should put it around it to wrap it around. Wrap it so that you cover it from above.
From above.
Here, this knot that you have. You should cover the knot.
Somehow I don't.
Yes. Hold them. Hold them there.
Cover. Well, I kinda covered it, yes. Should I take my fingers out?
You should put the wide end through the center and widen it. In fact, this kind of knot. And put the wide end there and tighten. Yes, 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 through the center. And to put it through...
Through the center, through the bottom.
Yes, 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 through the center.
Whoa. Put it right where my fingers are, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, what?
Well, I'm not sure.
Well, let's say you've done it.
But I have some, like... well, that's about... But why didn't our participants manage to cope with the task? The fact is that human communication is a very complex system. It cannot realize all the tasks with words only. To understand each other, we need to see the interlocutor, read his facial expressions, analyze gestures. However, it is possible that in the future we will expand the boundaries of our communication.
But if a man needs to improve this, and there will be time and resources for that, and 100 million years ahead, yes, then we will be there. I don't know, to communicate telepathically, or whatever will be there. But it will certainly happen. Another thing is that for this to happen, there must be a need for this to happen. And if it isn't necessary, and it is enough not to talk, but to express your thoughts somehow differently, or you won't have to express your thoughts at all, then this will all be lost. That is, if we have there, I don't know, if there are any automatic machines that deliver to our mouth tasty things, and we don't have to speak, then this ability will atrophy, and we won't speak anymore.
However, any of the hypotheses predicting the future of human speech remains nothing more than a bold fantasy. It is only one thing that is clear. The language has proven to be such a complex invention of the man that so far, no science has been able to clarify its past and predict exactly the path which it will develop further.